Fellas, it's fight week for Jones and Miocic, a fight that a lot of people have a problem with. I don't have a massive problem with this fight, I just wish it weren't for the undisputed belt, but I ain't going to complain about it now. But I feel like this entire card has such a 2021 or like an old UFC vibe to it. Like, you've got Jones and Miocic competing for a main card or main event in 2024. You've got Oliveira and Chandler running it back. You've got the likes of Chris Weidman, Jim Miller, Mickey Gall, Damon Jackson competing on, you know, a pay-per-view card in 2024. But to be fair, it does have some prospects. You've got Nickal, you've got Ruffy, you've got Marcus McGhee, so it isn't just veterans and old people. We're going to be doing a UFC 3 and full prediction and breakdown for this card. Now, in terms of what I got last week for McGhee and Protez, went 9-1 on the card, which is pretty solid for a prediction as well. But to be fair, I will say a lot of the guys on that card, like a lot of the favourites ended up winning, so I feel like a lot of people did well. I'm also going to do a parlay at the end where we basically go through all the predictions in this video and kind of categorize them by which ones I'm most confident with and which ones I'm least confident with. And we'll start off with the first fight, which is going to be Veronica Hardy taking on Eduarda Moura. Veronica Hardy, probably the best unranked flyweight in the, well, unranked women's flyweight out there. She's a really good striker, usually always has the striking advantage in every fight, extremely quick as well is Veronica Hardy, and she's actually kind of powerful as well. She seems to have impact whenever she connects as well, super quick on the feet, and she's going to be taking on Eduarda Moura, who's more of a grappler. She's shown good grappling in both of her fights. She's 1-1 in the UFC. She couldn't really get the win over Diniz, but she still had decent grappling in that fight. In terms of who I'm going to pick to win, I'm going to go with Veronica Hardy to win this one by decision. She's got good takedown defenses, Veronica Hardy. I feel like she's got the grappling and the takedown defense to avoid anything from Moura, who's 1-1 in the UFC. And I feel like Moura's striking is just terrible. And you've got Veronica Hardy, who's an amazing striker. I think she pieces her up on the feet for the majority of the fight. Survives any grappling threat that Moura has to offer. Just keeps the fight standing and picks her apart. Maybe could even get a finish, but it's quite unlikely in women's MMA, let's be for real. In terms of keys to victory for both of these women, for Veronica Hardy, I think bullying on the feet and maybe getting a finish. Yeah, the striking differential in this fight is pretty crazy. Veronica Hardy is such a better striker than Moura. So I feel like her keys to victory is just to bully her on the feet, avoid the cage, don't let her get close and take you down, and just stay at range and rip her to the body like you do to most opponents. And for Moura, it's kind of the opposite. You want to back her up and take her down. That's your best opportunity of winning this fight. You ain't out-striking Veronica Hardy. Try and close the distance as soon as possible. Make the fight boring. Unfortunately, she's got a fight style that she kind of has to make it a boring fight in order to win. So holding her against the cage, taking her down, latching up control time, that's her best opportunity of winning for Moura. But that's the keys to victory for Veronica Hardy and Eduarda Moura. I'm picking Veronica Hardy. And then we've got quite a decent fight. Oban Elliot 2-0 in the UFC versus Bassil Hafez, who debuted against JDM and then beat Mickey Gall. In terms of who I'm picking to win, I'm going Hafez by TKO in the first round. I don't understand, and to be fair, I am basing this off Topology rankings, but I don't understand why Oban Elliot is such a big favourite going into this fight. I really don't understand why he's such a massive favourite. He isn't like he's some massive prospect. Yes, he's 2-0 in the UFC, but he's taken on Hafez, who debuted against Jack Della Maddalena. Let me just say it was on short notice against JDM. Went to a close competitive decision. So close that a lot of people actually thought he beat JDM on that night, which is crazy because obviously now we know JDM for being one of the best welterweights. And then in his last fight, he beat Mickey Gall. Fair enough, he probably should have finished him, but he still got the win over Mickey Gall. He's going to be taking on Oban Elliot, who nearly got finished by Val Woodburn as well. He debuted in the UFC against Val Woodburn, nearly got finished. So I'm going to go with Hafez to TKO him in the first round. Hafez has looked really good. He's like an absolute powerhouse in the UFC so far. And I think he's just going to dominate Elliot on the feet. He does really good at pressuring as well. He did it to Mickey Gall. When Mickey Gall usually uses grappling, Hafez just backed him up, kind of neutralized the grappling, and I feel like he can do that to Oban Elliot, whose main game plan is usually just to hold people against the cage. He's got questionable stamina. I'm not saying he's got bad stamina, but, you know, 3 rounds just holding people against the cage. He doesn't have the best strike, and I think Hafez just picks him apart and potentially gets a finish in that first round. So I'm going to go with Hafez to TKO him in the first round, land that big shot on Oban Elliot, drop him, go for the finish, and I honestly think Hafez is going to win this fight now. Keys to victory for both of these. For Oban Elliot, the keys to victory is to initiate the wrestling. Striking, just pure striking with Hafez is a bit of a bad opportunity, especially when he was landing on JDM. So just initiate the wrestling and don't bother striking with this dude. Take him down, look to sub or control time. Basically just grapple is the main key to victory for Oban Elliot. It's worked in both of his fights in the UFC so far. It should work again. And for Hafez, it's kind of the opposite. Pressure him to minimize grappling effectiveness. Like I said, he did this against Mickey Gall and it ended up working because Mickey Gall could barely get going with his grappling. Make it a dogfight. Try and make it an exchange, because when you make it a dogfight, you've got a better chance of landing flush, and landing flush is another good chance of winning because Oban Elliot's got a questionable chin, got dropped and nearly finished by Val Woodburn in his UFC debut. So those are the keys to victory for Elliot and Hafez. I'm picking Hafez to win by TKO in the first. I think Elliot should not be that big of a favourite. Then we've got Mickey Gall himself. He's going to be taking on Brahimaj. Bit of a weird fight. Mickey Gall, kind of what? Yeah, he's definitely washed in the UFC. I mean, he's lost 4 out of his last 5. He's on average fighting once a year. Made a comeback after 2 years recently at UFC 302 just to lose to Hafez, who we just talked about. But to be fair, he didn't look terrible in that fight with Hafez. He showed a decent chin. He was landing a couple of shots. His grappling, he could get going at some times. So he didn't look terrible in the fight with Hafez, and he still has got decent grappling. He's a good submission artist, is Mickey Gall, but he's just not really beating any top opponents. I mean, the dude's basically known for beating CM Punk and Mike Jackson, who are ironically the worst fighters to ever enter the UFC. We've got Brahimaj, who's also not the best. He's 2-3 in his last 5 fights. And both the guys that he submitted in the UFC ain't even in the UFC anymore. They're not UFC worthy, so we can't really compare him to Mickey Gall or compare him to anyone else in the UFC because he's not really been able to beat anyone. And in his last fight, he lost to Temba Grimbo, another grappler. So I'm going to go with Mickey Gall. I'm going to say he wins this one by decision. He didn't look too bad in his last fight, like I said, against Bassil Hafez. He was able to survive. He was fairly durable, and I think his striking is better than Brahimaj's, but I think Brahimaj is probably more dangerous on the feet, but I think the grappling of Mickey Gall is going to get him this fight now. And the keys to victory for both of these guys, for Mickey Gall, it is to pick him apart at range on the feet, not to get up close, not to start brawling with him, but just to pick him apart with range with his kickboxing, mixing the grappling with the striking. I don't think you should stick to one or the other. I think you should initiate the grappling and the striking because he is a good grappler, but I think he could also win this fight on the feet. But be careful with the submissions because when you do take Brahimaj down, he's had 2 submissions in the UFC. It's something to be aware of. So be careful of the submissions of Brahimaj. And for him, Brahimaj, pressure him on the feet, look for the knockout. Yeah, he's probably got the better boxing out of him and Mickey Gall. So pressure him on the feet, looking for the knockout, and threatening submissions when the grappling exchanges do arise. So Mickey Gall's obviously going to initiate the grappling eventually. He always has. So when that happens, I think Brahimaj has to be aware of the grappling exchanges and just threat the submissions. That's another one of his best opportunities of winning. Threat the submissions, pressure him on the feet, but I'm going Mickey Gall to win this one by decision. Then we've got a fight between a ranked heavyweight, Marcin Tybura, a great guy, going to be taking on Diniz. Now, this is short notice. Diniz was supposed to take on Derek Lewis a couple of weeks ago, ended up falling through on really short notice. Now he's rebooked against Marcin Tybura. I think this is in replacement for Krylov and Mirzakhanov. Probably could have done a better job, but I'm not going to complain. We still got the fight. I'm going to go with Marcin Tybura to win this one by decision. A lot of people are saying that Diniz is like, oh, this is like a much easier fight for Diniz than Derek Lewis was, and I completely disagree. I think this is a very bad matchup for Diniz. I think Tybura beats him. This is a big step up for Diniz. I get it. He comes from a glory kickboxing background. He's a good striker. He outstrikes most people in the UFC. I think he's got more finish, like a lot of knockouts in his record as well. The majority of his fights end in a knockout. So I get it. He's a good striker, fairly dangerous on the feet for his size, but the dude nearly got 10-8'd. I think he did get 10-8'd by Austin Lane, the NFL player who got knocked out by Greg Hardy. That's who he got 10-8'd by. His grappling absolutely sucks. He's taking on Marcin Tybura. I feel like the best way you can describe Marcin Tybura is that he's good everywhere. He's not amazing everywhere. He's not terrible anywhere. He's kind of just good everywhere. It's like if you were to create a fighter on like a UFC video game and put their attributes to halfway everywhere, you'd get Marcin Tybura. I think he's going to come in with a game plan similar to Tatu Ivaza. Don't want to brawl on the feet. Just take it down and get the submission or initiate the grappling ASAP like he did with Ivaza. I think he's going to have the same game plan against Diniz. And I think Tybura has shown that he's much more experienced and just better than Diniz so far. And on top of that, you've got to remember, Diniz is fighting on short notice. He's been preparing for Derek Lewis, so his entire training camp has been for a completely different style than Marcin Tybura. And you look at Tybura's record, he's only losing to like the best heavyweights. He lost to Aspinall, who's the best heavyweight in the world. He lost to Volkov, who's a top 3 heavyweight in the world right now. That was by decision as well. He survived. And he lost to Sergey Spivak. Fair enough. I mean, Spivak's in the top 10, and he's beaten Spivak before as well, so it isn't like he's losing to Cans. It isn't like he's not just some random ass fat unranked heavyweight. I get it, he's not the best, he's not elite, but it's a big step up for Diniz, and I'm going with Tybura to win. I think he's going to out-grapple him, potentially get a submission early on like he did with Tatu Ivaza, but I think the safe option is Tybura by decision. Now, the keys to victory for both of these guys, for Marcin Tybura, it's a similar game plan to the fight with Tatu Ivaza. Take him down and beat him there. You don't want to be striking with Diniz because you're probably going to get chinned, and there's just no point when you've got the grappling advantage. So take him down, beat him with the grappling, initiate the grappling early on, and stay defensive on the feet. Don't try and eat one to land one like a lot of people do. Just stay defensive on the feet. He's a very powerful guy, Diniz, and for Diniz, his game plan is to batter him on the feet. I mean, you are definitely the better striker out of you and Ivaza. Avoid the grappling at all costs because you've got to, I mean, you're inferior when it comes to grappling, and try and keep the same pace for 3 rounds. Like, I'm not saying he's got a terrible stamina, but we know that Tybura's stamina isn't that bad. He showed it in the fight with Romanov. I guess that's a bit of a bad example because Romanov's got some of the worst stamina in the UFC, but just try and keep the same pace for 3 rounds. Try not to gas out because that's only going to be worse when you you're facing Tybura. But yeah, I'm going to go Tybura decision. Then we've got a fight between two kind of old heads, which seems to be the theme of this card and this pay-per-view. Jim Miller versus Damon Jackson. I'm kind of surprised that Jim Miller's coming back this quickly. Like, I know his last fight was in April, but he took an absolute beating from Bobby Green. But no, Jim Miller, he's not even that washed. Like, yes, he's out of his prime. Yes, he's old. But you look at his record before Bobby Green. He'd won 5 of his last 6. All of them coming by way of finish as well. He was knocking people unconscious. He was choking people out. Now, granted, these might have not been the highest level competition of the UFC. You look at Damon Jackson. The dude's lost 3 out of his last 4. It feels like ever since he got slept by Dan Ige, he's never really been the same. He's been a lot more cautious, and he is a good grappler, is Damon Jackson. His striking's not bad. He does a good job at mixing the grappling up with the striking, but he's not elite by any means. I'm going Jim Miller to win this one by decision. I think Jim Miller's going to have the better moments throughout the fight, and he comes from more of a grappling background, does Jim Miller. I think the grappling's going to be able to neutralize, keep the fight on the feet, and I think Jim Miller's just going to completely outbox Damon Jackson. I know we just got completely destroyed by Bobby Green, but you can't compare Bobby Green to Damon Jackson. And on top of that as well, this is the 155. I'm pretty sure this is the 155 debut for Damon Jackson as well. He's used to fighting at 145, and I feel like this is only going to benefit Jim Miller, if anything. So I'm going to go Jim Miller to win this one by decision. The keys to victory for both of these guys. For Jim Miller, it's to pressure boxing, land a big shot. He's a powerful guy still now in his 40s, is Jim Miller. He dropped Bobby Green in their last fight, and Bobby Green's meant to be one of the most defensive boxers in the UFC. So I think if he can land that big shot on Damon Jackson, he can potentially render him unconscious and use the takedown defense. But remember, you've got grappling. Don't panic if he gets you down, because Jim Miller does have good jiu-jitsu. He's shown it in multiple fights now. He's got a solid jiu-jitsu base. Now, for Damon Jackson, you want to piece him up at range. You don't want to be boxing with him. You don't want to be exchanging with him. Just piece him up at range with your kicks. Take him down and look to dominate him with grappling. That's when he does his best work, when he's dominating people with grappling. So I feel like that's what he should try and do in this fight. Take him down, dominate him with grappling. Don't try and exchange and box with him. I think that's the game plan for Damon Jackson. But I'm going to go Jim Miller by decision. Then we've got another old head fight. Chris Weidman taking on Eryk Anders. I mean, it's good that we don't have Chris Weidman on a pay-per-view main event in 2024. That would have been tragic. But he's going to be taking on Eryk Anders. Yeah, Chris Weidman, since he's come back from that brutal injury to Uriah Hall, he's never really been the same. I mean, he got absolute shit kicked out of him by Brad Tavares. He didn't look amazing. I mean, he didn't look bad against Bruno Silva, but obviously the very controversial double eye poke main event ended up giving him the win, which a lot of people disagreed with. And now he's taking on Eryk Anders, who's another old head. Eryk Anders, it's kind of hard to judge how good he is, because you look at his past couple of fights in the UFC, he's been getting wins over the likes of Jamie Pickett and Kyle Dawson. Jamie Pickett dropped him, nearly knocked him out in that fight, and he ain't in the UFC anymore. And Kyle Dawkins has lost most of his fights in the UFC, and again, he's not even in the UFC anymore either. So it's not like he's been beating this high-level competition. It's a fight between two fairly washed guys, but I want to go Chris Weidman to win this one by decision. I think this is more of a favourable fight for Chris Weidman. Like I said before, he didn't look too bad against Bruno Silva, who's a fairly good kickboxer. His grappling seemed to be alright in that fight as well. He was able to take Bruno Silva down a lot of the time as well. And on top of that as well, I'm surprised that he's actually got a decent chin. Like, he's fairly tough, is Brad Tavares. For the absolute beating, not Brad Tavares, it's Chris Weidman. For the absolute beating that Brad Tavares put on him, and he's been able to survive that fight, it's fairly impressive. Eryk Anders is super slow as well. You look at him in that fight with Jamie Pickett, it was so slow in that fight, nearly got knocked out. Keys to victory for both of these guys. For Chris Weidman, it's to try and mix up the grappling as soon as possible. The best chance of Chris Weidman winning this fight is if he does mix up the grappling, kind of make it a bit boring, hold him against the cage, look to get the takedown, because that's his bread and butter. Check those leg kicks. You know, everyone knows your weakness is leg kicks now, especially in that Brad Tavares fight. So check those leg kicks, be aware to check it, and just try and take advantage of how slow Eryk Anders is. He's a very slow striker. Take advantage of it on the feet. And for Eryk Anders, attack the leg, stomp his leg into oblivion. It's an obvious weak point. Brad Tavares exposed it. It's pretty obvious after he got his leg snapped by Uriah Hall. So you've got to attack the leg against Chris Weidman and just pressure him. Minimize the grappling effect. Pressure him, attack the leg, stomp it into oblivion. That would be my game plan for both of those guys. But I reckon Chris Weidman's going to get the win by decision. It's a bit of a tough one to call. But this one, enough of the old heads. We've got some up-and-coming guy. Well, an up-and-coming guy in Marcus McGhee and an insanely skilled guy in Martinez. Really good fight is this. Probably one of the best fights on the card. And it's so tough to pick as well, because you've got Jonathan Martinez, who finished Cub Swanson with leg kicks, finished Adrian Yanez with leg kicks, went to a close decision, and beat Saidna Magomedov, which is fairly impressive as well. Recently lost to Jose Aldo, but that was in enemy territory, and I mean, he lost to Aldo by decision. It's not that, you know, you can't really shame him too much. Going to be taking on Marcus McGhee, who is a newcomer to the UFC, but has kind of blown the roof off the place in his past couple of fights. He's finished every single one of his fights in MMA so far, 8 by knockout, 1 by submission, and he's had 3 KOs so far in the UFC. Knocked out Bolanos as well, who recently won at UFC Vegas 100. So Marcus McGhee's been looking dangerous recently. I can see why a lot of people are picking Marcus McGhee. Because he's also got the wrestling as well. And we saw in that fight with Jose Aldo, Jonathan Martinez, he struggled a bit with the wrestling. So if Marcus McGhee, a power puncher, can mix it up, he'll have success. But I'm going to go Jonathan Martinez winning this one by decision. I think Jonathan Martinez has it to win it back. I will say about Marcus McGhee, he is quite hittable. As dangerous as he is and as good as his offense is, he is kind of hittable. He got hit a lot against Gaston Bolanos. He leaves himself to get open to be hit quite a lot. And Jonathan Martinez, previous to that fight with Jose Aldo, this dude was on an absolute tear. He's a ranked fighter. I mean, he finished Adrian Yanez, finished Cub Swanson, beat Said Nurmagomedov. I swear only 3 guys have done that as well. I say he's much more technical than Marcus McGhee as well. Maybe not as dangerous. Maybe the grappling's going to be a problem, but from a technical standpoint, he's definitely better. I think he's just going to not piece up. I don't want to say piece up, because when I say piece up, it sounds like they're going to, get dominated. But I just simply think he's going to outstrike Marcus McGhee. Avoid the danger. I reckon he'll have a good job defending the takedowns as well. Maybe he'll get clocked by a big shot when, trying to defend a takedown and Marcus McGhee comes up top, but I reckon Jonathan Martinez has this one in the bag. I reckon he's going to go to a decision, beat him by decision, but it should be a good fight. If Marcus McGhee can mix it up well, it should be a pretty good fight. Keys to victory for both of these guys. For Jonathan Martinez, it's to be cautious all 3 rounds. You've got to be cautious when you're facing Marcus McGhee. You've got to be cautious for the full 3 rounds. You can't get complacent with this dude because he'll send you into next week. Don't exchange in the pocket because you'll get slept. The power advantage is heavily on the side of Marcus McGhee. And be aware of the takedowns. Like I said, you got taken down in that fight with Jose Aldo. Marcus McGhee likes to mix it up. Even though he's a power puncher, you know that the takedowns are coming. And for Marcus McGhee, it's to pressure him, look to box. You want to keep him on his back foot, keep him against the cage, looking to box him. Check those leg kicks because Jonathan Martinez is one of the best leg kickers in the bantamweight division. And mix in the wrestling early. If you mix in the wrestling early, it's going to keep him cautious. We saw when Topuria faced Holloway, mixed up the wrestling early, and it meant that his striking could be more effective. So I think if he mixes the wrestling early, not only is Jonathan Martinez worrying about the takedown defense, but I mean, it also gives Marcus McGhee a high chance to win if he can actually get it to the ground. But I'm going to go with Jonathan Martinez to win, but I'm really excited to see how McGhee performs at the top level against a ranked fighter, because he is a big prospect right now in the bantamweight division. Then we've got the main card, Mauricio Ruffy versus James Llontop. I mean, I think everyone's been waiting a while to see Mauricio Ruffy. Obviously, coming off that win over Jamie Mullarkey at UFC 301, absolutely demolished him, and he's just so fun to see. I mean, I just feel like he's a bit of a mismatch. I'm going Ruffy to win this one by knockout in the first round. I mean, if him being at the Fighting Nerds isn't enough, it's the best gym in the UFC right now. We just saw Carlos Prates dominate Neil Magny. It is the best gym in the UFC. He's from the gym. I mean, he's knocked out most of his opponents in MMA. He's on a big streak of knocking people out as well. He looked amazing against Jamie Mullarkey as well. He's such a crafty striker. He's not just one of these generic kickboxers. He likes making it up. He likes doing spinning attacks. He likes coming from left, right, center, doing all these weird shit. And it's just so fun to see from a fan's perspective of how just wild Mauricio Ruffy is. Came off that dominating win over Jamie Mullarkey. He's just so fun to see, and he's very good on the feet. He's a very dangerous guy, very powerful as well. James Llontop don't really have a chance. I feel like this is a bit of a sacrificial lamb for James Llontop, kind of like when Val Woodburn faced Bo Nickal. He had a win on the Contender Series, and now he's 0-2 in the UFC. And it's not even like he's on a winning streak. You'd expect, even if Ruffy was to get a layup, it'd be against someone that's won in the UFC. We're literally feeding this dude, a guy that's never had a single win in the UFC. I'm going to go Mauricio Ruffy to win this one by knockout in the first round. I think he just styles on him and gets the win. Now, the keys to victory for both of these guys, for Mauricio Ruffy, it's to style on him. Get the crowd going, break him down, and just finish him. I don't need to tell him this. He does it in every single one of his fights. He just did it to Jamie Mullarkey. He's going to do it again. Just styling him and break him down. And for James Llontop, it's just a prayer, bro. Pray that you can get some sort of Hail Mary finish. Maybe pray that, Mauricio Ruffy lands a groin shot and he ends up getting DQ'd so he can get the win. Just pray, bro. If I had to give this dude actual advice, it would be try and survive early on and turn up later on. James Llontop has decent stamina. That's probably one of the only benefits he has coming into this fight. He's got decent stamina, so if he can survive early on when Mauricio Ruffy's most dangerous and take it into the later rounds, which is unlikely, but if he can, and he can somehow clip him with something big later on or do something big later on, that's his best chance of winning this fight. But I think Mauricio Ruffy's in for a big win tonight. Oh, well, not tonight, but Saturday night. So I'm going to go Mauricio Ruffy by KO in the first round. Then we have Karine Silva versus Viviane Aruajo. I'm going to go Karine Silva to win this one by decision. She's actually quite a good prospect in women's MMA. She's on a big winning streak, and what makes her stand out, and she's actually getting finishes. She's getting a ton of finishes in the first round. Most women MMA fighters, even when we consider them a prospect, they struggle to get finishes, but Karine Silva's getting a lot of finishes recently. She had a ton of submissions, well, not a ton, but she's had a few submissions in the UFC. Very, very dominant grappler. Aruajo, she's trying to be, I mean, she's kind of been on a bit of a downslide. She's been losing fights consistently. She's been picking up a win here and there, but it's not looking good for her. I'm going to go with Karine Silva to win this one by decision. She's a really good prospect. She could potentially get a submission as well. I think if she keeps this up, she could take her down and get a submission in the first round, but I'm going to keep it safe. I reckon she just dominates with grappling, takes her down, threats the submission, does enough to get the control time. I think, like I said, the second most likely outcome is that she gets the submission, but I'll play it safe. Karine Silva by decision. She has looked really good. Now, the keys to victory for both of these. For Karine Silva, it's like I just said, take her down. Use your speed to set up the takedown. She's much faster on the feet, so use the speed to set up the takedowns and then just get the submission, or at least threaten the submissions. For Aruajo, it's just to have solid takedown defense. You've got to have solid takedown defense. If you ain't got solid takedown defense, it's a wraps. So have the solid takedown defense, keep the fight on the feet, try and land something big on the feet, but it's just this fight is made to give Karine Silva a win, so I'm going to pick Karine Silva to win by decision, but she could obviously pull off a submission. Then we've got Paul Craig versus Bo Nickal, talking to submission artists. Yeah, I'm going to go Bo Nickal by TKO in the first round. Yeah, we get it. Paul Craig beat Ankalaev. He beat Jamal Hill. That's all anyone talks about when they mention Paul Craig, how we can get this Hail Mary submission. And you're not wrong. He's done it multiple times, but he hasn't done it for so long. And we saw him against the grappler not long ago. He faced Brendan Allen, and he got absolutely dominated by Brendan Allen in the grappling exchange. He couldn't even threat a submission against Brendan Allen. And on the feet, he's awful. He's one of the worst strikers in the middleweight division. Got absolutely bullied on the feet by Caio Bralo. Even Brendan Allen was cracking him and outstriking him on the feet. He's just a terrible striker all around, and he's lost 4 out of his last 5. He didn't even get a submission over Andre Muniz either. I know Andre Muniz is a good submission artist, but even that was by ground and pound. He hasn't had a submission since early 2022. And I feel like this whole idea that he could pull off a Hail Mary submission ain't going to happen, especially when he's facing Bo Nickal, who has all these wrestling credentials, one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, has submitted multiple fights, well, I say multiple, but submitted a handful of guys in the UFC so far, looks to be a dominant wrestler, and also has KO ability, and probably has better striking than Paul Craig already. So I'm going to go with Bo Nickal to TKO in the first round. In fact, I think Bo Nickal can win this fight however he wants. I think if he wants to take him down, beat him with ground and pound or get a submission, I think he can do that. If he wants to knock him out on the feet, I think he can do that too. I think this is genuinely Bo Nickal's fight to win. And the UFC have done a good job matchmaking this, because it's kind of like a win-win situation. It's a step up for Bo Nickal. It's a guy that has quite a big name in the UFC, gets him close to the rankings, but at the same time, it's a chance for Paul Craig as well. He's not just a sacrificial lamb, because he can, I guess, pull off some Hail Mary submission, but it's very unlikely. I think Bo Nickal TKOs him in the first round. Keys to victory for both of these guys. For Paul Craig, use body kicks on the feet. Paul Craig has decent kicks. He's got decent body kicks. He seems to have improved his striking slightly since moving down to middleweight, but he's still a terrible striker, and his boxing ain't existent. And that brings me to my next point, which is just don't try and brawl on box, because if he does, he's going to get slept by Bo Nickal. His best chance is a Hail Mary submission. Pulling off a submission like he did against Ankalaev, Krylov, and Jamal Hill. Like a Hail Mary submission, that's his best opportunity at getting a win, as we say in every single one of his fights. And for Bo Nickal, his best opportunity to win is just anything he wants. If you want to knock him out, knock him out. If you want to get a TKO, TKO him. If you want to submit him, submit him. Anything he wants, I think he can do. If he wakes up and he wants to sleep him on the feet, he can do that. If he wakes up and he wants to get a submission against Paul Craig, he can do it too. This is his oyster. This is Bo Nickal's fight to win, so I'm picking Bo Nickal by a very confident pick, and I reckon he KOs him on the feet, just because he don't really want to risk it with a submission game as Paul Craig. And then we've got one of the best submission artists in the UFC, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, the people's main event. We've seen this fight before. It completely exceeded, it exceeded our expectations, and it's just, you know what you're expecting from this fight. Like, you know what you're going to get. You know it's going to be a banger. You know it's going to be a war. You know it's going to end in a finish, and it ain't going to go the distance. I'm pretty sure it is a 5-rounder, but that don't matter, because it ain't making it past a second. Now, I feel multiple ways about this fight. I've kind of been going back and forth on my pick for this fight ever since it got announced. Logic is telling me that Charles Oliveira wins. I mean, he's beaten Michael Chandler before. He's submitted both of the guys that Michael Chandler's lost to before. Michael Chandler's 2-3 in the UFC, with his 2 wins being over Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. And he hasn't been in the octagon since 2022. Oliveira only loses to the likes of Makhachev, who's the best in the world, and had a close fight with Arman Tsarukyan. So all logic and knowledge is telling me that Charles Oliveira should win this fight. Okay, all the logic is alluding to Oliveira, but without trying to sound corny, kind of like my senses are telling me that Michael Chandler's got a chance of winning this fight. He's in the best shape he's ever been in. He's hungry for a win. He nearly finished Charles Oliveira in that first fight, and from a stylistic point of view, this is a very unfavorable matchup for Charles Oliveira. But I am going to go with Oliveira to win this one by sub in the second round. I feel like it is the safe pick, picking Oliveira by sub, even though I kind of want to go with Chandler. I'm not going to pick somebody based on vibes. He's been out for a while. He's coming back. He's lost 3 out of his 5 in the UFC. He's been finished by Oliveira before. It's tough for Oliveira. It's not an easy fight, but I've just got to pick him to win this one. I think he can knock him out on the feet as well, depending on how goofy Michael Chandler looks on the feet. I reckon Oliveira has a chance of knocking him out, and obviously when it comes to the submission game, he's the best submission artist in the UFC. He could definitely pull off a submission. I think he's got way more ways to win. So I'm going to go with Oliveira to submit him in the second round. Now, the keys to victory for both of these guys, for Oliveira, it's to stay off the back foot. That's when Chandler does the best. When Dan Hooker was on the back foot, he got knocked out. When Oliveira was on the back foot, he ended up getting dropped. When Ferguson was on the back foot, he got KO'd. So stay off the back foot when you're fighting Michael Chandler, and don't brawl. Don't play into Michael Chandler's game and make it a dogfight, because you've got a higher chance of getting chinned. Land counters to his goofy striking, like I said before, and look to submit. That's your best opportunity. Countering him on the feet to drop him or to knock him out, and then look to get the submission after that is, in my opinion, Oliveira's best chance of winning. And for Chandler, it's to mix in the wrestling, but because of the submissions. You've got to mix in the wrestling when you're facing Charles Oliveira. You can't be afraid of the wrestling. Makachev and Sarukian mixed up the wrestling. They ended up winning the fight. Chandler's the next elite wrestler that Oliveira's facing, so I feel like he's got to mix it up, but obviously you've got to be careful of the submissions when you're facing Oliveira. Pressure him, stay explosive, try and knock him out on the feet if you are going to strike with him, and please, for the love of God, use some form of fight IQ. He's probably got the worst fight IQ in UFC history. A lot of people said that if Michael Chandler had fight IQ, he'd be a defending champion, and I agree. Just please use some form of fight IQ. I get it, you're coming back on MSG, but I'm expecting him to have at least some form of fight IQ coming into this fight, but I'm going to stay with a safe pick, which is Charles Oliveira, and then that brings us on to the main event. Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. I don't mind this fight. From a nostalgia standpoint, I like it. I can kind of see the appeal. Is it the best versus the best? No, it's not. But anyway, in terms of who I think is going to win, I've been saying ever since this fight got announced, people are writing off Stipe way too much. Like, he has genuine KO ability in the heavyweight division, or at least he did in his prime. But even against Jones, he's got KO ability, and he's got wrestling. It's not Cyril Gane versus Jones too. Stipe is a good wrestler. He's got these wrestling credentials, so stylistically, it's kind of tough for Jon Jones. But with that being said, he is 42 years of age. He has been out since early 2021, and when he was out, and when he was in, his last fight, he got knocked out by Francis Ngannou. So it isn't prime Stipe. It's not peak condition Stipe in his prime after being active. So for that reason, I've got to go with Jon Jones by submission early. Now, just because I'm picking Jones to submit in early on, that doesn't mean I think, Jones is, obviously going to win, or he's an extremely confident pick. I just think if Jones is going to win this fight, it's going to be by some sort of submission early on. We saw him in his most recent heavyweight fight. He submitted Cyril Gane pretty quickly. Now, fair enough that he's Cyril Gane, but he's tuning with the likes of Gable Stevenson and Gordon Ryan, and I just think his game plan has to be a heavy grappler into this fight. It has to be to take him down, initiate the grappling, look for the submission, and if Jones does that correctly, I feel like he will get the sub against Stipe. But even then, you could flip it around and say that Stipe's got solid takedown defense. He's fought the likes of DC before, and if you even think on the feet that Jones and Ngannou were comparable, whether it be technique or power, you're delusional. I feel like Stipe can afford to be a bit reckless on the feet with Jon Jones, because he doesn't have to worry about the power coming back at him. So I'm going to go with Jon Jones to submit him in the first round. Now, the keys to victory for both of these guys, for Jones, it's to change levels. Look for the submission early on, or just demolish him with ground and pound. Don't try and strike with him. You've been doing your work with Gable Stevenson and Gordon Ryan. Change the levels as soon as possible. Look for the submission early on like you did with Gane, or just beat him with your ground and pound, especially now that the 12-6 elbow is illegal. That's going to be very favorable for Jon Jones. And just keep your distance on the feet. When you are striking, don't try and box him. Keep your distance with your leg reach, your kicks, as you normally do, the oblique kicks. And then for Stipe Miocic, use wrestling to defend the takedowns. If anything, you want to be keeping this fight on the feet if you're Stipe. So use your wrestling knowledge and your background in wrestling to defend the takedowns. Box his head off on the feet. Stipe is a better boxer than Jon Jones from a power and a technique point of view, so try and box his head off and just show him who owns the heavyweight division. Jones, fair enough, he's got these credentials at light heavyweight years ago, but he's in your division now. Show him who owns the heavyweight division, box his head off, knock him out cold. That's Stipe's best opportunity of winning. Now we'll go into my parlay. Now, obviously, you can see I've categorized every fight by high confidence, medium confidence, and low confidence. So my high confidence picks, the ones that I'm very confident in, is Bo Nickal winning, Karine Silva, Mauricio Ruffy, and Veronica Hardy. These are the ones that I'm very confident with. The ones that I'm very, just very confident that they're going to get past their fights. And if you are going to bet, I would recommend betting on these guys. The medium confidence ones, I wouldn't bet the house on these guys. I still think they're going to win, but there are small doubts in my mind. It's not a super confident pick. I won't bet the house on these guys. You've got Jon Jones, Chris Weidman, Jim Miller, Mickey Gall, and Hafez. And then low confidence picks, I wouldn't recommend betting on these guys at all. We've got Oliveira, Martinez, and Marcin Tybura. Tybura's in the heavyweight division, fat heavyweights, anything could happen. Martinez versus McGhee is a very close fight. And Oliveira, like I said before, he is a safe pick, but he's facing Michael Chandler. We don't know what to expect from Chandler. So these are all low confidence picks. But that is my predictions for UFC 309. The parlay, who I think is going to win. Let me know your thoughts on the card. I think it's a pretty decent card. It's a bit overhated, not one of the best of the year, and it is a very top-heavy card, but it is what it is. Let me know your thoughts on this card. Thank you for watching.